My brother looked me in the eye at my retirement party and said, "You're just waiting to die now." He said it with a smile, like it was a joke, but everyone heard the truth in it. He'd already written me off, the spinster sister who never married, never had kids, just worked her whole life as a teacher. So when he and his wife started planning my transition to assisted living, without asking me, I let them think I was the lonely old fool they imagined. But I wasn't done living. I was just getting started. And while they were busy counting down my days, I was secretly counting up theirs. The days until they'd realized that the woman they dismissed was about to outlive every single one of their expectations. I'm 68 years old, and I own a vineyard in Oregon now. I wake up to fog rolling over 30 acres of Pinot Noir grapes, host wine tastings for couples half my age, and last month, Forbes called me the most inspiring late-life entrepreneur in the Pacific Northwest. But 3 years ago, I was Margaret Chen, the retiring high school chemistry teacher everyone felt sorry for. No husband, no children, just 40 years of lesson plans and a brother who couldn't wait to warehouse me somewhere quiet. Richard always had opinions about my life. When I chose career over marriage, he called it selfish. When I traveled solo through Europe every summer, he called it sad. When I saved instead of spending, he called it pointless. "What are you saving for, Maggie?" he'd ask at every family dinner. "You can't take it with you." The retirement party was his idea. He threw it at his country club, made it black tie, invited people I hadn't seen in decades. His wife, Patricia, kept introducing me as Richard's sister who never married, like it was my entire identity. Their daughter, Sophie, my only niece, was there with her husband, both of them checking their phones every 5 minutes, counting down until they could leave. That's when Richard gave his toast. He talked about my dedication to others' children since I never had my own. He joked about how I could finally rest after all those years of trying to make teenagers care about chemistry. Then he said it. "Now Maggie can focus on what retirement's really about. You're just waiting to die now." The room went silent. Patricia laughed nervously. Sophie didn't even look up from her phone. And I stood there, holding my champagne glass, watching my own brother bury me while I was still breathing. That was the night I decided to live louder than all of them combined. I never asked for much. That was my problem, maybe. While Richard built his construction empire and married Patricia with her family money, I spent 4 decades teaching chemistry to teenagers who'd rather be anywhere else. But I loved it. Every September, I'd get a new batch of kids who thought science was boring, and by June, I'd have at least a dozen writing me thank you notes, saying I made them want to become doctors, researchers, engineers. I lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment for 30 years. Drove the same Honda Civic until it died, then bought another used one. Richard called it pathetic. "You make decent money, Maggie. Why live like you're poor?" But I wasn't poor. I was careful. Every summer, I'd disappear to a different country, Italy, Japan, Peru. I'd come back with stories and photographs, speaking a few phrases in new languages, my skin sun-kissed, and my spirit renewed. "Who travels alone at your age?" Patricia would ask, wrinkling her nose. It's not safe, but I'd climbed Machu Picchu at 62. I'd swum in the Blue Lagoon in Iceland at 65. I'd eaten street food in Bangkok and danced at a festival in Barcelona. I collected experiences while they collected things. I saved relentlessly. Not because I was cheap, but because I had a dream I never told anyone about. Since my first year teaching, I'd put away nearly half my salary. Lived simply, invested wisely, watched it grow. Richard assumed I was hoarding money for some sad nursing home future. He didn't know about the investment accounts, the stocks, the bonds. He definitely didn't know about the vineyard in Oregon I'd been eyeing for 5 years. Every Christmas at Richard's massive house, I'd bring homemade cookies and handmade gifts. Patricia would accept them with that pitying smile, then show off whatever designer bag Richard had bought her. Sophie would barely look up from her phone to mumble thanks. They treated me like the poor relation the charity case they had to include. "And Maggie, why didn't you ever get married?" Sophie asked once, like it was a disease I'd caught. Richard answered for me. "Your aunt was too picky. Now it's too late, too late." Like my life had an expiration date that had already passed. But I had student letters in a box under my bed. Hundreds of them. Kids who became adults, who wrote to tell me I'd changed their lives. Kids who invited me to their weddings, sent me pictures of their babies, named their daughters after me. Richard had his mansion and his money. I had legacy. And unlike him, I wasn't done building mine. 2 weeks after the retirement party, Richard started his campaign. It began with concern, the kind that sounds caring if you're not listening closely. Maggie, that apartment has stairs. What happens when you can't climb them anymore? He'd show up unannounced, Patricia in tow, both of them studying my home like health inspectors looking for violations. "We found this wonderful community," Patricia said one afternoon, sliding a brochure across my kitchen table. Sunset Gardens Assisted Living. The pictures showed beige walls, plastic flowers, old people playing cards with vacant eyes. They have activities. Bingo every Tuesday. I was 68, not 98. I did yoga 3 times a week, hiked on weekends, still had all my faculties. But they talked to me like I was already half gone. "It's not a nursing home," Richard insisted. "It's a community. You'll make friends." "I have friends," I said. "Where?" He looked around my apartment like they might be hiding. "When's the last time someone visited you here?" The truth was, I preferred my solitude. After 40 years of teenage drama, I savored quiet mornings with my coffee and books. But to Richard, alone meant lonely. Different meant deficient. They started manufacturing crises. Patricia called one evening breathless. Richard drove by and saw your lights were off at 8 p.m. We were so worried. I'd been at a wine tasting class, learning about soil conditions and grape varieties, but I didn't tell them that. Richard began documenting things. He'd take pictures when he visited. A dusty shelf, a stack of papers, vitamins on the counter. "Just keeping track," he'd say. "In case we need to show someone you need help, show who?" I wondered, but didn't ask. Then came the doctor visits. "Just come with me for my checkup," Richard said. "Keep me company," but once there, he steered conversations toward me. "Doctor, would you talk to my sister about safety? She lives alone, no emergency button, refuses to move somewhere." Supervised. The doctor, barely 35, glanced at me. "Ms. Chen seems perfectly capable." "She seems that way," Richard interrupted. "But she's almost 70. No spouse, no children. Who checks on her?" I sat there, blood pressure rising, while my younger brother discussed me like I was furniture that needed storing. Patricia nodded along, adding helpful observations. "She still drives at night. Isn't that dangerous at her age?" They were building a case brick by brick. Every normal aspect of my independent life became evidence of risk in their narrative. The science teacher who'd managed hundreds of teenagers, who'd traveled the world solo, who'd never missed a day of work in 4 decades, suddenly I was a fragile liability who couldn't be trusted with her own life. But I knew what this was really about. Richard had seen my bank statements once, years ago. He knew there was money. And a single woman with no heirs? That was an opportunity wrapped in concern. It happened on a Thursday. I'd spent the morning at the farmer's market, chatting with vendors about heirloom tomatoes and organic farming methods. My apartment smelled like fresh basil and possibilities when the doorbell rang. Richard stood there with 2 strangers, a man with a clipboard and a woman with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maggie, these are from Adult Protective Services," Richard said, not meeting my gaze. Someone filed a concern. My hands went cold. Someone. The woman stepped forward. "We received a report about an elderly person potentially unable to care for themselves safely. We just need to do a brief assessment." Elderly person. Like I was a category, not a human. They walked through my apartment, the man taking notes while the woman asked questions. "Do you ever forget to take medication? Have you fallen recently? Do you feel confused?" "No," I answered each time, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. Richard hovered, occasionally adding helpful context. "She says no, but she lives alone. How would anyone know if she fell?" They examined my refrigerator, checking expiration dates. They tested my smoke detectors. They asked me to recite the date, my address, to count backward from 100 by 7s. I did it all, perfectly, while my brother watched with fake concern painted on his face. "She seems fine," the man finally said, and Richard's jaw tightened. "What about preventative placement?" he pushed. "Before something happens?" The woman shook her head. "Ms. Chen appears completely competent. We can't act on what might happen." After they left, Richard stayed. His mask slipped for just a moment, frustration flashing across his face. "This is for your own good, Maggie. Why are you being so stubborn?" "Get out," I said quietly. "You're going to die alone in this apartment, and no one will find you for days." I said, "Get out." He left, but not before delivering his parting shot. "When something happens, and it will, don't expect me to drop everything and save you. You're choosing this." I locked the door behind him and sank onto my couch, shaking. Not from fear or frailty, but from rage. My own brother had tried to have me declared incompetent. He'd weaponized the state against me, turned my independence into evidence of incapacity. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd shown his hand too early. Now I knew exactly what he was capable of and, more importantly, what he wanted. The gloves were off. He thought I was marking time until death. I'd show him what living looked like when you had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong beyond Richard's betrayal. Why now? Why push so hard? I'd been retired for exactly 3 weeks. Then it hit me, the family trust. Our parents' trust would redistribute in 6 months, on what would have been Mom's 90th birthday. Richard was the executor, but we were equal beneficiaries, unless one of us was deemed incapacitated. I called my former student, James, who'd become a lawyer. "Can you look into something for me?" Within 48 hours, he had answers that made my stomach drop. "Your brother filed paperwork 2 months ago," James said over coffee, sliding documents across the table. "He's been building a case for financial conservatorship. Look, he photographed your bank statements from a year ago when he helped you with taxes. He documented every trip you took as reckless spending. He even had a cognitive evaluation scheduled without your knowledge. Can he do that?" He was trying to establish a pattern. "See this?" James pointed to a form. He listed himself as your emergency decision-maker at 3 different medical offices. And here, he's been calling your former colleagues, asking if they noticed confusion before you retired. My hands trembled as I read. Emails between Richard and Patricia, planning my future. "Once we have conservatorship, we can sell the apartment. Sunset Gardens has availability. The trust money would cover a decade of care, maybe more." But the worst was a text from Sophie to a friend, screenshotted and saved. "Uncle Rich says Aunt Maggie's losing it. Good thing she never had kids." Can you imagine? Anyway, once they sort out her situation, Dad promised I could have her retirement accounts for my startup. Finally, something good comes from her hoarding all that money. She won't even know it's gone once she's in the home. My retirement accounts. Money I'd saved for 40 years. They were already dividing like vultures over carrion. James leaned forward. "There's more. Your brother incorporated an LLC last month. Chen Family Asset Management. Guess who's listed as the sole managing member?" Everything clicked. The assisted living push, the APS visit, the doctor appointments, all designed to create a paper trail of decline. Meanwhile, Richard was positioning himself to take control of everything I'd built. "He even contacted Sunset Gardens," James continued. "Put down a deposit to hold a room for you. Told them you were combative about the transition, but would come around once you had no choice." No choice. That's what he thought I was, choiceless, helpless, already buried. He'd probably calculated how long I'd last in that beige prison, how quickly isolation and medication would dim whatever fight I had left. I stared at the papers, seeing my life reduced to assets and liabilities in my brother's spreadsheet. 40 years of work, of saving, of careful planning. He wanted to steal it all under the guise of caring for me. "What do I do?" I asked James. She smiled grimly. "First, we block every avenue he's trying. Then, Miss Chun, if you're interested, we make him regret ever underestimating his science teacher sister." I drove home from James's office in a daze. The street lights blurred. Through tears I refused to let fall. In my apartment, I stood in the middle of my living room, looking at everything I'd built. My books, my travel photographs, the silk scarf from Morocco, the pottery from Korea. Richard wanted to reduce it all to a garage sale, pack me away in some beige box while he counted my money. That night, I sat in the dark, feeling the weight of every single year. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I was just a lonely old woman clinging to independence I couldn't maintain. Maybe it would be easier to give in, to let them warehouse me, to stop fighting for a life they'd already decided was over. I pulled out photo albums, looking for evidence that my life had mattered. There I was at 30, covered in flour with my first chemistry class, all of us laughing after a failed volcano experiment. At 40, hiking the Appalachian Trails solo, strong and confident. At 50, receiving Teacher of the Year, surrounded by cheering students. At 60, swimming in the Dead Sea, arms spread wide like I could embrace the whole world. But what did I have to show for it now? No family of my own. A brother who saw me as a problem to solve. A niece who'd already spent my money in her head. Neighbors who didn't know my name. Was this how I'd be remembered? As the woman who died alone, found days later because the smell bothered someone. I found myself at my computer at 3 a.m., looking at Sunset Gardens' website. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe I could make friends, play bingo, count down the inevitable in climate-controlled comfort. My finger hovered over the Contact Us button. Then I saw it, a small note stuck to my monitor. I'd put it there years ago, a quote from Marie Curie. "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." Next to it, a photo from my last day of teaching. 32 students, all wearing handmade chemistry-themed t-shirts, holding a banner. Ms. Chen taught us to be catalysts for change. I closed the laptop, opened a new notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Things I haven't done yet." The list started small: learn Portuguese, see the northern lights, swim with dolphins. Then it grew bolder: start a business, write a book, fall in love maybe. By sunrise, I had 3 pages of life I hadn't lived yet. Richard thought I was marking time until the end. He had no idea what a science teacher could do with the right catalyst. And I just found mine: pure, crystallized spite mixed with 40 years of unrealized dreams. The reaction was going to be spectacular. I didn't sleep that night, but by morning, I wasn't tired. I was electric. Richard had made one fatal error in his campaign. He'd reminded me who I used to be. Not the retiring teacher he pitied, but the woman who'd handled explosive chemicals, teenager hormones, and budget cuts for 4 decades without breaking. I called James first. "I want to fight. Everything. What do we need?" First, revoke any medical permissions your brother has. Second, we file a restraining order based on harassment. Third, and this is important, document everything from your side. Show competence, show planning, show life. Show life. That became my mantra. I started that morning. Yoga class at 6 a.m., where I held warrior pose longer than women half my age. Breakfast at the cafe, where I discussed cryptocurrency with the 20-something barista, recorded the conversation with her permission. Library volunteer shift, helping kids with science homework, head librarian happy to write a competency statement. But the real shift happened that afternoon. I'd been researching that Oregon vineyard for years, accumulating knowledge like I once hoarded lesson plans. The owner was retiring, properly retiring, with grandchildren to spoil and a house in Florida waiting. He'd been looking for someone who understood that wine wasn't about profit, but about patience, chemistry, and love. I made the call. "Miss Chen," Robert Hayward said, surprise in his voice. "I thought you decided against it." "I changed my mind. When can I visit?" "This weekend? I could show you the whole operation, introduce you to the staff. But it's a big undertaking. Most people your age are looking to do less, not more." "Mr. Hayward," I said, steel in my voice, "I'm not most people." I hung up and immediately booked a flight. Then I called my financial advisor, pulled up every account, every investment, every penny I'd saved. It was more than enough. More than Richard dreamed, probably. 40 years of compound interest and careful planning had built something substantial. That evening, I started a blog. Third Act Living. My first post was titled, "I'm 68 and just getting started." I wrote about ageism, about families who bury you before you're dead, about choosing to live loudly when the world wants you quiet. Within hours, comments poured in from women like me, dismissed, underestimated, furious, and ready. I printed every document James suggested, created medical directives explicitly excluding Richard from any decisions, changed beneficiaries on every account, set up a trust of my own, ironclad and lawyer verified. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on red lipstick, my best dress, and took myself to the fanciest restaurant in town, ordered champagne, told the server I was celebrating. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "I'm not dead yet," I said, raising my glass to my reflection in the window. And that's reason enough. The next morning, I woke with purpose. Fighting Richard would require more than legal documents. I needed witnesses, allies, proof of life, so vibrant it would make his claims look ridiculous. So I started building my army, one person at a time. First, Dr. Sarah Kim, my physician for 15 years. I scheduled a comprehensive evaluation, including cognitive testing. "I want everything documented," I told her. Memory, reasoning, physical health, all of it. She ran every test imaginable. The results? Cognitive function in the 95th percentile for my age, physical health better than most 50-year-olds, 0 signs of decline. She wrote a detailed letter stating I was exceptionally capable of independent living and complex decision-making. Next, my financial team. I met with my accountant, Martha, who'd handled my taxes for 2 decades. "I need a complete financial competency evaluation," I said. She pulled my records, every investment I'd made, every tax year filed perfectly, the steady growth of my portfolio. "Margaret, you have better financial sense than most of my corporate clients," she said, preparing an affidavit. Then came the character witnesses. I reached out to former colleagues, students who'd become successful adults, fellow travelers from my solo adventures. The responses overwhelmed me. Dr. Jennifer Wu, once my struggling chemistry student, now a pediatric surgeon. Ms. Chen taught me discipline and fearlessness. She's the sharpest person I know. Mark Thompson, who I traveled with through Thailand. Margaret out-hiked people 30 years younger. She's unstoppable. But my best ally came unexpectedly. Sophie, my niece, called one evening. "Aunt Maggie, I need to apologize." Her voice was small, uncertain. "I heard what Dad's trying to do. It's wrong. You're not what he says you are." "What changed your mind?" "I saw your blog. But honestly, it was before that. I've been watching you at family dinners, really watching. You're the only one who asks me about my actual dreams, not just when I'm getting married or promoted. Then I saw those texts I sent my friend about your money, and I felt sick. You saved that money. You earned it. And we were just dividing it up like you were already gone. I'm so ashamed." She offered to write a statement. More importantly, she forwarded me emails, conversations between Richard and Patricia planning my future, discussing my money like I was already gone. Evidence of their schemes straight from the source. The Oregon trip exceeded expectations. Robert Hayward walked me through 30 acres of vines, explaining soil conditions, fermentation processes, distribution networks. I asked questions that surprised him, revealed the chemistry knowledge that made winemaking suddenly make perfect sense. His staff watched me taste wines, identifying notes and flaws with precision. "You've done your homework," Robert said, impressed. "I've been preparing for this for 5 years, I admitted. I just didn't know it until now." We toured the neighboring vineyards too. That's where I met Thomas Fitzgerald, silver-haired, recently widowed, owns the award-winning vineyard next door. He offered to mentor me through the transition. "The wine business needs more people who understand the science, not just the romance," he said with a warm smile. By the time I flew home, we had a tentative agreement. I'd apprentice for 6 months while financing the transition, then take full ownership. It wasn't just buying a business, it was buying a new life. one that required expertise, energy, and everything Richard claimed I'd lost. My army was assembled. My plans were in motion. Now came the fun part, letting Richard know his war was already lost. James filed everything on a Monday morning. Restraining order for harassment, cease and desist for defamation, formal revocation of any medical permissions Richard had assumed, and the crown jewel, a preemptive lawsuit for attempted financial elder abuse. We didn't wait for him to strike again. We struck first. Richard was served at his office, in front of his construction crew. James hired a process server who used to play college football, impossible to ignore or intimidate. The papers were comprehensive, including every piece of evidence we'd gathered, his forged documents, the LLC formation, witness statements, even Sophie's forwarded emails. His first call came within an hour. I didn't answer. Patricia called next, then Richard again. 17 missed calls by lunch. Finally, a text. What have you done? What I'd done was flip the narrative. Now he was the one who looked unstable, grasping, suspicious. The restraining order meant he couldn't come within 500 feet of me or contact me except through lawyers. No more surprise visits. No more manufactured crises. No more building his false case. That afternoon, I published a blog post, When Family Becomes Threat, a guide to protecting yourself from financial elder abuse. I named no names, but anyone who knew us would recognize the story. Within days, it had thousands of shares. Women messaged me with their own stories, brothers who stole inheritances, children who forced home sales, families who saw aging relatives as ATMs. Richard tried damage control. He called mutual acquaintances, claiming I was having a paranoid episode, but James had prepared for this. We sent copies of Dr. Kim's evaluation, Martha's financial assessment, and several character witnesses' statements to anyone Richard might contact. Hard to claim someone's incompetent when faced with documented proof of their exceptional competence. The most satisfying moment came when Richard's lawyer contacted James. They wanted to resolve this misunderstanding quietly. Translation: Richard realized his scheme was documented, exposed, and legally actionable. He wanted to make it go away. My client will consider dropping the lawsuit, James replied, if your client agrees to permanent no contact, returns any documents he possesses regarding Ms. Chen's finances, and provides written admission that all claims of her incompetence were false. The admission was the knife twist. Richard would have to formally state I was fully capable, destroying any future attempts at conservatorship. His lawyer balked, but we had them cornered. Fight us and risk criminal charges, or admit defeat and slink away. During negotiations, I flew back to Oregon. This time, not as a visitor, but as a future owner. Robert introduced me to distributors, taught me testing procedures, showed me financial records. I absorbed everything, my teaching skills translating perfectly to learning. Every photograph I posted, me among the vines, testing soil, meeting with vendors, was another nail in Richard's coffin. Hard to claim someone needs assisted living when they're actively buying a business. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Richard thought he was hunting vulnerable prey. Instead, he'd awakened something fierce, strategic, and done with being underestimated. Richard capitulated faster than expected. His lawyer sent the signed admission, my brother formally acknowledging I was fully competent with excellent cognitive and financial capabilities. The restraining order became permanent. The lawsuit was dropped in exchange for his complete retreat. But I wasn't satisfied with just winning. I wanted to transform victory into something unforgettable. The vineyard purchase finalized in October. I sold my apartment for 3 times what I'd paid, the city's gentrification finally working in my favor. But instead of disappearing to Oregon immediately, I did something that would haunt Richard's peripheral vision forever. I bought a condo in his neighborhood. Not next door, that would be too obvious. But close enough that we'd shop at the same grocery store, use the same gym, exist in the same ecosystem. A beautiful 2-bedroom with a view of the mountains, in a building known for young professionals and active retirees who ran marathons and started businesses. I hired movers who specialized in life transitions and made sure they parked their enormous truck right outside Richard's office on moving day. The logo was ideal. New beginnings. It's never too late. I supervised the move, wearing a sharp business suit, very much not looking like someone who needed assistance with anything. But the real twist came at Thanksgiving. Every year, Richard hosted the extended family at his mansion, playing patriarch while Patricia stressed over catering. This year, I sent a group email. I'll be hosting Thanksgiving at my new home in Oregon. You're welcome to join me at Cascade Vista Vineyards for a wine-paired dinner prepared by our award-winning chef. The responses split exactly as I'd expected. The younger generation, cousins, their kids, Sophie, immediately RSVP'd yes. An authentic vineyard Thanksgiving? Instagram gold. The older relatives, Richard's contemporaries who'd bought into his narrative about poor Maggie, hesitated. Then I added the twist. For those concerned about travel, I've arranged a chartered bus from Portland. Pickup at 10 a.m., return by 8 p.m. Sophie has graciously agreed to coordinate carpools to Portland. Sophie, his own daughter, now my accomplice and event coordinator. She'd called me the week before. Aunt Maggie, can I intern at the vineyard next summer? I want to learn about running a business from someone who actually built something themselves. The email chain exploded. Relatives asking about wine selections, dietary accommodations, whether they could bring friends. Richard stayed conspicuously silent while Patricia sent a terse, "We'll be hosting our traditional dinner as always." By November, 32 family members had confirmed for my dinner. 7 for Richard's. I hired a photographer to document the event, created a hashtag. Hashtag Thanksgiving at Cascade. Every cousin under 40 was already planning their posts. Richard's formal dinner suddenly looked like what it was, a relic, while I was offering an experience.
But I saved the best detail for last.
In my final email, I mentioned, I'm also excited to introduce you to Thomas, who'll be joining us. He owns the neighboring vineyard and has been invaluable in teaching me the business. Thomas Fitzgerald, 65, widowed, with those kind eyes that crinkled when he laughed. We weren't dating, yet, but the possibility hung in the air like perfectly aged wine. Richard thought I was done with life. I was just getting started with all of it. Thanksgiving at Cascade Vista Vineyards was everything I'd imagined and more. 32 family members arrived to find the tasting room transformed. Elegant table settings, panoramic windows overlooking the vines, live jazz quartet playing softly. I greeted each guest personally, wearing an elegant burgundy dress that matched our signature Pinot Noir. Aunt Maggie, this is incredible, Cousin David said, his teenage daughters already taking photos by the fireplace. Richard always said you were. Well, counting down the days? I supplied with a smile. Yes, he mentioned that. Wine. The dinner was flawless. Each course paired with different wines, Thomas charming everyone with stories of harvest seasons while I explained the chemistry behind fermentation. Sophie live-tweeted the entire event, photos of her badass aunt who bought a vineyard at 68, going viral in our extended social circle. Meanwhile, Richard's dinner proceeded exactly as scripted for 20 years. Patricia posted one photo on Facebook, the formal dining room, 7 people looking stiff around too much food. The contrast was devastating. Within hours, relatives who'd chosen his dinner were commenting on Sophie's posts. Next year we're coming to Oregon. But karma wasn't finished. The week after Thanksgiving, Richard's construction company lost its biggest contract. The developer, Margaret Winters, happened to be in my wine club. I heard what he tried to do to you, she told me over a glass of our Chardonnay. I don't do business with people who prey on family. Word spread through the business community. Richard's reputation, built on being a family man, crumbled as the story circulated. Not the details, I never violated the legal agreement, but enough. People knew. Contractors looked at him differently. Clients asked careful questions about family values. Patricia left in January. Not dramatically. She simply announced they were taking time to reassess. She moved to her sister's in Scottsdale, posting photos of herself at spa retreats and wine tastings. Finding myself again at 61 became her new tagline. The divorce papers, Sophie told me, cited irreconcilable differences and financial malfeasance. I didn't celebrate their pain, But I didn't mourn it either. They'd planned to discard me like expired goods. Instead, they discarded each other. The most meaningful moment came in March. The local newspaper ran a feature on second-act entrepreneurs, highlighting people who started businesses after 65. My photo took up half the page, standing among the vines at sunset, Thomas beside me. We were officially dating by then, holding a bottle that had just won a regional award. The article mentioned my teaching career, my solo travels, my blog that had gained 50,000 followers. It painted a picture of vibrance, intelligence, and endless possibility. The journalist asked about retirement, and I laughed. Retirement? I'm too busy living to think about stopping. Richard saw it, of course. Everyone did. His business struggling, his wife gone, his daughter spending weekends at my vineyard, while his dismissed, elderly sister graced newspaper covers and wine magazines. The man who'd tried to bury me alive was watching me bloom in full color while his world went gray. Sophie forwarded me one last text from him. How did I lose everything? You didn't lose it, she'd replied. You threw it away. Starting with Aunt Maggie. 8 months after that horrible retirement party, I stood in my vineyard's event space, addressing a crowd of 60 women. The third act living workshop had sold out in 2 days. Women from across the country, all over 50, all told they were too old, too late, too irrelevant to matter anymore. They told me I was just waiting to die. I began, my voice carrying across the room. So, I decided to show them what living looks like when you're not afraid of other people's timelines. The workshop was born from my blog, which had evolved into something bigger than revenge or vindication. Women shared stories of dreams deferred, talents dismissed, lives made small by others' expectations. We were an army of the underestimated, and I'd accidentally become their general. I taught them what I'd learned: legal protection, financial independence, the power of documentation. But more than that, I taught them chemistry, not the kind from textbooks, but the kind that happens when you mix courage with opportunity and add a catalyst of righteous anger. Your life is not over when they say it is, I told them. It's over when you decide it is. And if you're sitting here today, you've already decided it's not. Margaret Winters attended, the developer who dropped Richard's contract. She announced a new initiative, funding women over 60 who wanted to start businesses. Dr. Kim came, offering free cognitive assessments to anyone facing conservatorship threats. Even Martha, my accountant, volunteered financial planning services. By afternoon, we'd created a network. Women exchanged numbers, formed plans, sparked possibilities. A retired nurse wanted to open a clinic. A former librarian had an app idea. A 70-year-old artist was ready for her first gallery show. The energy was electric, reminding me of those moments in class when a difficult concept suddenly clicked for everyone at once. Thomas found me during the lunch break, wrapped his arms around me from behind. You did this, he murmured. No, I said, watching women who'd arrived quiet and defeated now gesturing wildly, voices rising with excitement. They did this. I just lit the match. The vineyard had become more than a business. We hosted workshops monthly, created an artist residency for older women, established a scholarship for mature students entering hospitality. Last week, a documentary filmmaker called, wanting to feature our story in a film about ageism and triumph. Sophie managed our social media now, having quit her startup to learn the wine business properly. You know what I love most, she told me last week. You didn't just prove Dad wrong. You proved that everything he feared about aging was actually about him, not you. I thought about Richard sometimes, alone in his big house, surrounded by everything he'd protected so fiercely that he'd lost it all. Patricia had taken half in the divorce. Sophie barely spoke to him. His business limped along, reputation stained. He'd gotten exactly what he'd wished on me, a life reduced to waiting. But I didn't have time to dwell. This morning, I had soil samples to test, a new Riesling blend to approve, and Thomas had suggested we travel to New Zealand this winter to study their techniques. At 69, my calendar was fuller than it had been at 30. The workshop ended with a toast. 60 women raising glasses of our signature Pinot Noir, faces glowing with possibility. I thought of that retirement party, of Richard's pronouncement that I was just waiting to die. "Here's to the third act," I said, my voice strong. "Here's to proving that the best chemistry happens when they write you off too early. Here's to living so loudly that death has to wait its turn." The cheer that went up could probably be heard all the way back in Richard's neighborhood. Good. Let him hear it. Let them all hear it. We weren't waiting for anything anymore. We were too busy living. 6 months later, I married Thomas in the vineyard, surrounded by vines heavy with grapes and women who'd found their voices. Sophie was my maid of honor. Richard was invited, but I heard he drove by that day, saw the parking lot full of cars, heard the music drifting over the hills. They told me I was just waiting to die. Instead, I lived better than them all. And I was just getting started.